Hello, I'm Megan Kalsman. I'm a policy researcher at the Carbon Leadership Forum with the University of Washington. This is the final session in a six-part educational series all about embodied carbon and policy. Today, I'll be talking about embodied carbon and deconstruction and reuse policies. This presentation will cover reuse and embodied carbon, different policy opportunities. We'll dive into a few different case studies and look at the development process and stakeholders. In creating policies, we can match opportunities with different embodied carbon strategies. While all three of these levels, project, system, and materials or procurement, could be addressed at a local or state government level, likely the project level is highly context dependent, making it a better fit for a local government. So on the project level, we can build less and reuse more, designed to reduce embodied carbon and increase material or structural efficiency. Different tools can be used here, like calculators. And on the system level, we can choose low carbon systems and assemblies. We can use alternate or low carbon materials. Tools include whole building LCA. And on the procurement level, we can optimize by selecting the lowest carbon version of a specific product. We can promote clean manufacturing, such as efficiency and fuel switching. And tools in this area include environmental product declarations and the EC3 tool. Effective policy packages can really include a mix of different policy measures, like reuse and deconstruction, zoning and city incentives, procurement policy, etc. And we actually go into detail on each of these other topics in our other videos. But today we're talking about reuse and deconstruction. So why reuse and what happens at a building's end of life? Current practices in recycling and disposal of construction and demolition debris contribute to loss of resources through material degradation or downcycling and increased raw material extraction, contributing to greenhouse gas emissions. The U.S. Environmental Protection Agency has sponsored pilot projects and developed resources for jurisdictions adopting deconstruction requirements. Extending the life of a material or building avoids the cradle-to-gate embodied carbon from extracting and manufacturing new materials. Extending the life of a material avoids materials end up in landfills, reducing emissions and negative environmental and health impacts from landfills. So this really points to increasing the circularity of building materials. Effectively dealing with buildings at the end of their life has the potential to unlock significant economic value as we contribute and continue to expand on emerging circular economy principles. This relates to many different topics or different types of action, some of which we will touch upon today, like building reuse or adaptive reuse of an entire building or a portion of the building. Material reuse, referring to reuse of individual salvage materials. Deconstruction or salvage, meaning to save materials rather than sending them to landfill, enabling future material reuse. Design for disassembly, so designing buildings and assemblies in a way that they can be easily taken apart and reused. Government-led programs to support for market development. Investment in existing communities, historic buildings, and high priority development areas. And links to economic development, local economy, creating jobs, businesses, and looking at the zero waste principles. There are tools to calculate the embodied carbon benefits of reuse, a few I'll talk about here. Whole building LCA tools like Tally or one-click LCA and more can exclude A1 to A3 global warming potential for reused components of a building. Additionally, the CARE tool, which is currently in development, this can quantify the trade-offs between retrofit and new building. This also includes operational energy trade-offs. You can see a screenshot of the CARE tool here on the right. Deconstruction and reuse can create jobs and add new regional markets for the removal, sale, and distribution of salvage materials. This requires more skilled contractors than demolition. It's also creating jobs in deconstruction and removing materials, and also in transportation, storage, refurbishing, and reselling of these materials. The creation of new markets, reuse warehouses, and local community hubs is a great opportunity to connect with others, provide training on refurbishing or reuse, and doing the sale of salvage materials. Just one example here, you can see the Cincinnati Reuse Center. They sell and refurbish building grade products. There's also a youth training program targeted towards at-risk youth to teach basic work and life skills that will set them on a successful path. So let's look at a few different policy opportunities to influence reuse. There's a variety of opportunities for policy and government-led programs, such as site selection and building design. So choosing an existing building to reuse or add on to, rather than tearing down the building and starting new. Sufficiency measures are important to think about. For example, looking at how to design buildings or spaces to be more flexible and adaptable to different uses. So this can really reduce the amount of new floor area needed, making better use of this floor space, and perhaps exploring metrics such as kilograms of carbon dioxide emissions per occupant, in addition to looking at the carbon emissions generally. And so one related policy precedent here is the Los Angeles Adaptive Reuse Ordinance, and I'll dive a little bit deeper into these precedents as we go along. So we can also have material selection and construction details. For example, specifying existing or salvage materials and material longevity in a project, using design for disassembly principles. Some related precedent here is the LEED version 4.1, which includes a little bit about this. Deconstruction and on-site construction waste diversion. So instead of demolition, using salvage and deconstruction, landfill diversion of surplus materials and construction waste. A related policy here is the Portland Deconstruction of Buildings Law. Lastly, material reuse markets and storage. Like I mentioned earlier in Cincinnati, there's other examples of warehouses for material storage between uses. There's examples of online platforms to enable designers and contractors to identify available materials. We'll talk a little bit about Houston's reuse warehouse and reapply. So this is a growing landscape. Policy efforts are expanded and growing. Here's just some you can see here in the US and Canada. I would definitely recommend to check out the All for Reuse map, where you can filter by different areas like remanufacturing, training programs, etc. And the link is here in the slide. So let's talk about a few case studies. The Los Angeles Adaptive Reuse Ordinance provides development incentives, such as mezzanines, density bonuses, reduction in off-street parking requirements, and other regulatory exemptions for adaptive reuse of eligible buildings in the specified downtown project area. You can see this project area here in the photo on the right. So the goal of this policy is to help reduce vacant space, as well as preserving downtown LA's architectural and cultural past, and encouraging the development of a live, work, and residential community downtown. Also looking at building reuse, the City of Vancouver has a green building rezoning requirement. And embodied carbon is calculated for each building, calculated using a whole building life cycle assessment, using standard assumptions according to the City of Vancouver embodied carbon guidelines. So this will require a % reduction of carbon emissions for buildings. Reuse is one of the ways that you can reduce embodied carbon of your building to meet the % reduction requirements. And another less direct example is the City of Vancouver's empty homes tax, also known as the vacancy tax. This encourages empty and underutilized properties to get back on the rental market. So a few examples here about building reuse. So looking at deconstruction and salvage, one example is Portland's Deconstruction of Buildings Law. And this states that all single dwelling structures, including houses and duplexes, in all zones must be fully deconstructed as opposed to mechanically demolished if the structure was built in 1940 or earlier, or the structure is designed as a historic resource. Projects must use a city-published list of certified deconstruction contractors to perform this deconstruction work. The chart on the right is an example of how many pounds were salvaged from an average home. Softwood lumber really stands out, other materials like plywood, windows, doors, etc. So this was a success. They were able to combine the public health benefits because of deconstruction. Sometimes lead and asbestos really can travel. And different cities approach this in different ways. So heritage preservation, like we talked about in this example, is just one. So as far as deconstruction and salvage, there's some work in the EU as well. The EU taxonomy is a draft criteria. Currently, this is a goal to produce or to prevent or reduce waste generation, including the generation of waste from the extraction of minerals and waste from the construction and demolition of buildings. The EU also has a construction products regulation proposal. And this is revisions to the current rules in place since 2011. And it will create a harmonized framework to assess and communicate environmental and climate performance of construction products. So new product requirements will ensure that the design and manufacture of construction products is based on state of the art to make these more durable, repairable, recyclable, and easy to manufacture. This regulation will offer a digital solution to reduce administrative burdens as well, including a construction products database and a digital products passport. So regarding material reuse, markets, and storage, a few examples here. Massachusetts Department of Environmental Protection has a Recycling Works blog, provides guidance on how to develop a reuse plan, how to set a timeline, budget, taking inventory, and how to identify potential reuse outlets. In Houston, Texas, they have a reuse warehouse. It's a city-run warehouse that provides space for excess building materials. They accept materials from individuals, supply companies, as well as builders. And it's freely available for reuse by any nonprofit organization, which is also really cool. And another related precedent here is the Pennsylvania Recycling Market Center Incubator. So looking at policy precedents around byproducts into materials manufacturing, we have a few examples. Colorado Circular Economy Development Center. This established a center which works with processors and manufacturers in the state to increase use of recycled content inputs. It also facilitates connections among recyclers, transporters, municipalities, higher education, and more. In Washington State, they have a materials marketplace. It's a free online marketplace, a project of the City of Tacoma and Seattle Good Business Network, funded by Washington Department of Ecology, also with support from U.S. Business Council for Sustainable Development. So this connects businesses and organizations, as well as entrepreneurs, to develop and scale reuse and recycling market opportunities. It directly supports BIPOC and women-owned businesses. And actually, to date, the program nationally has helped divert over 17 million pounds of material to higher and better reuse, generating over 1.6 million in value to participating businesses and organizations. So looking at development processes and stakeholders, there's a few questions to ask before we jump into an ordinance, understanding the local conditions. So questions to think about: is the public supportive? Do you need to plan a campaign or local input or stakeholders meeting to gather different information? Do you have the local markets to absorb materials? Are the majority of your city's current demolitions publicly funded or privately funded? Are property values high or are property values depressed? Are there a large number of blighted or condemned properties in your city? Tax dollars will fund those, and contracts are approached differently in that case. Private deconstructors can use tax deductions to offset the additional costs of deconstruction. Would that be an option? Is there a plan to train the labor force that know how to deconstruct? Data management. What kind of information is already tracked or already available to city agencies? And what existing processes are used to gather information or approve projects and act as gates or bottlenecks? Will there be permitting, certificate of occupancy, etc. So these are all questions to think about before embarking on an ordinance. So major takeaways of reuse and deconstruction include extending the life of a material or building. This avoids extraction and manufacturing emissions from creating a new one, which saves embodied carbon. Policy instruments we covered today were building reuse, deconstruction and salvage, material reuse markets and storage, and byproducts into materials manufacturing. There are many benefits which we covered of reuse and deconstruction. Of course, the environmental benefits, avoiding carbon emissions from manufacturing new materials for new construction, reducing environmental damage and community health impacts from landfilling construction materials after demolition, avoiding environmental damage from new construction on greenfield or previously undeveloped sites by encouraging preservation and increasing density in historic portions of cities. Economic benefits that we touched on today, providing opportunity for energy retrofits of outdated, inefficient, and high emission MEP systems, creating jobs, creating skilled jobs, supporting circular economy through design for disassembly and adaptability, which is really saving money on new materials and new construction. And the social benefits, some of which include preserving cultural resources and heritage, providing economic and social co-benefits, reducing local noise and pollution from demolition activities, and supporting new markets and jobs related to deconstruction and material reuse. So with that, thank you so much, and I hope you enjoyed our policy series.